And I think our timing is perfect. It's 12:30. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Will Harling. I'm the director of the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, and also one of the co-leads of the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership. And I see in the chat box, Luna just said, as a reminder, please put your questions into Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. For the presenters, I'll be tracking time. In this section, we're going to be having some great conversations with some amazing people. Lenya Quinn Davidson, who's the fire advisor for UC Cooperative Extension, the director of the Northern California Prescribed Fire Council, and so many other things, champion of prescribed burn associations across the state of California. And she's so kind, she even let me crash her pad, and I'm posted up in her kitchen right now. So getting a good cell signal. As well as Margot Robbins, who's the executive director of the Cultural Fire Management Council, as well as the Indian Education Director for the Klamath Trinity Unified School District, and the co-lead for the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network. And Lenya is going to be talking today a lot about the prescribed burn associations, as well as some of the other models used for cooperative burning. And a little bit later is going to be also talking fire policy with me on that second session. And Margot is going to be talking about the intergenerational learning that she's done both through the school systems as well as with the Cultural Fire Management Council. So with that, Lenya, if you want to take it away, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Thank you, Will. It is so funny to be sitting here in my office in Eureka and looking at you sitting in my kitchen. I love it. So like Will said, I was asked today to talk a little bit about some of the neat stuff that's going on around the state with prescribed burn associations and cooperative burning. And I decided to call the talk California's Prescribed Fire Movement, because I really see that as what this is. This is a grassroots movement that has just spread like crazy all over the state, and people are empowered and excited and leading in ways that we haven't seen until now. So I just think it's such an exciting time for prescribed fire especially within the private sector, and with cultural burning and all of these local community-based efforts that are just kicking ass all over California. So I'm going to talk about that, and that'll segue well into what Margot will share, which is a little bit of a deeper dive into the work that she's doing there in the Mid-Klamath. So I wanted to start with a little thing I put together today, a decade of inspiration and change, and just thinking about how far we've come just in the last decade in California. I put this funny picture of Morgan Varner on the left. I was thinking recently about kind of that first Klamath Fire Ecology Symposium, where Morgan gave that great talk about fear versus hope, and lessons from a frequent fire landscape in Florida, and how we were doing everything kind of wrong here in California, which at the time was true. And a lot of you in the Mid-Klamath were some of the only people really leading on this local prescribed fire work. And in 2009, we formed the Northern California Prescribed Fire Council out of some of the conversations that came out of that first Klamath Fire Ecology Symposium. And in 2013, we hosted California's very first TREX event. And then here we are in 2021, and we've hosted across the state, there have been 32 different TREX events. And we have about 13 different prescribed burn associations that have formed just in the last couple of years. So I think that these few images really tell a story about this movement that we've seen, and how exciting it is. And the map on the right, I'll talk a little bit more about it in a few minutes, but The blue are places where prescribed burn associations or other community-based prescribed fire groups have formed. And the orange are places where they're about to form, and yellow is they're places where they're having conversations about forming. So we're just really seeing a lot of change, rapid change. I mean, a few years ago, this map would have been mostly gray, except for the folks in the Mid-Klamath and some work in Trinity County and a few other places. But we have just seen an explosion of interest, and it's so exciting to see that happening. So I think one of the big questions that's come up in this decade of inspiration has really been about who has access to fire decision making, to using fire, to being involved in kind of just the discussion and the discourse around fire. And really this question of whether fire users need to be fire professionals. You know, does everyone who's using prescribed fire have to be someone who is also in fire suppression? And I think for a long time in the Western US, that has been the status quo, that if you wanted to be involved in prescribed fire, you had to be working for a fire management agency that was actively involved in fire suppression. I think we're really questioning that now, and we're changing that conversation, and we're saying, no, fire users don't need to be fire professionals. Fire users are stewards, they're local community leaders, they're landowners, they're cultural practitioners, and they're the people who are connected to place and to the land. So we're opening that up and really making it a more inclusive conversation, and you know, really kind of empowering a different future around prescribed fire. So I wanted to share some of the core philosophies of this prescribed burn association model, which we in California have really kind of borrowed and adapted from the model in the Great Plains of all places. And I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about going out to Nebraska and learning about prescribed burn associations and then bringing that back to Humboldt County and back to California. But there are some philosophies there behind that model that I just think are so powerful. And the very first one is really that idea of inclusivity, and that everyone's welcome, and that people, any kind of person has something to bring to the table when it comes to prescribed fire. It doesn't all have to be operational. It can be different skills. We have a lot of different skills that we employ when we plan burns or when we implement them. And there should be a spot for anyone who wants to be involved. And every burn is a training burn. And I feel like our work on prescribed burn associations in California has really been inspired by TREX and by the idea that everyone's both a student and a teacher, and that there's always something more to learn, and that there's always something that you can share with someone else. So that idea of cooperation and collaboration and training is really key to all of this. Now, I think the next one is really important. Prescribed fire does not have to be expensive or bureaucratic. And, you know, it is a fundamental tool that people have been using forever, and it still is. And we shouldn't always just be chasing money or getting bogged down in permits and bureaucracy. At the end of the day, we can go out and use fire, and it's a beautiful, simple tool that costs nothing. So if you have communities working together and people willing to volunteer and show leadership, prescribed fire is not expensive. And sometimes it's actually just totally free. So we need to remember that. Don't default to just thinking that you need money for this. And I think it's really important to remember that fire is a land management tool. It's not just a fire management tool. And this is something that came up for me when I was spending some time in Florida burning. I really noticed that the culture there around prescribed fire is that anyone who's a land manager is using prescribed fire. It's not just something that the fire management agencies are using. It's just a core kind of stewardship tool that anyone who's, you know, managing a piece of ground is going to have fire in their toolbox. So really trying to bring that notion back here to California. So I want to share just some of these amazing groups that have formed around the state in the last few years. There are a lot of groups that are actually calling themselves prescribed burn associations, or PBAs. So we have the one in Humboldt, we have one in Mendocino, there's Butte, Siskiyou, the Central Coast just formed one. So we're seeing a lot of these PBAs popping up all over the place. But we're also seeing groups that are calling themselves something different, even though they really are in essence a prescribed burn association or a community cooperative. So we've got the Good Fire Alliance down in the North Bay. It's kind of Sonoma and Marin counties. And Sasha Berleman, who I'm sure many of you know, is with Audubon Canyon Ranch, and they've taken up the lead on the Good Fire Alliance. But it's really a group of a lot of NGO folks and community members and landowners who are getting together and burning together and doing a lot of really awesome work down there. Not in an easy location either. There are also range improvement associations, which are really kind of like the early concept behind a prescribed burn association. So these are groups down in the South Central Coast, Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties, that are led by the ranching community and formed in the early to mid 1900s, and then had a long period where they were stagnant and weren't really doing much, and have now been reinvigorated because of all this movement around prescribed burn associations. So it's been pretty neat to see that. And they have a very, specific focus and kind of just a different vibe than some of the other groups up here, but really interesting and neat to see. There are also some other groups on the east side. So the Plumas Underburn Cooperative is another PBA that's up in Plumas County. And they're unique because they're burning mostly in timber. They have a lot of forested units, some added complexity there. And they're really using the Caltrex events to build capacity and skill and confidence among their PBA members. So it's been neat to watch them because they're taking a little bit of a different approach. And then there's a group down in the Southern Sierra, the Sierra Sequoia Burn Cooperative, which is really focused on cultural burning and tribal engagement and on the ancestral territory of some of the groups they're working with. So it's a broad, large region, I think 4 different counties that are involved in this group. And then of course, there are some of these longer standing efforts that aren't really prescribed burn associations, but are, have been an inspiration for more than a decade in some cases. And so we'll hear from Margot on the Cultural Fire Management Council. Some of the Karuk family-based burning that's going on out there is super neat and inspiring. Of course, the Klamath Treks and the Trinity Integrated Fire Management Partnership with the Watershed Center in Hayfork, and all the cool work that Don Hankins is doing. I think these are all just points of light, and we're all kind of working together to change the whole conversation around prescribed fire in California. So I think, let's see, I was going to show you all a picture. A couple of years ago, we hosted an event to bring all the leaders of these different groups together. So we all convened in Hopland. You'll probably recognize a lot of familiar faces in that picture, and spent 2 or 3 days just talking about laws and regulations and liability and insurance and PBA formation and just all the kind of nuts and bolts of how we were going to get these things off the ground in all of our different places. And we've continued to connect the different leaders. So we have a Podio page where we're all sharing and talking. And we've hosted some events and things like some webinars just to keep building the conversation and the capacity of all these different people. Because, a lot of these folks are new to prescribed fire in some ways, but they have some organizational support or just some passion and interest to lead. So we've been trying to create as many opportunities as we can to bring those folks together. So that's the Podio page where I see quite a bit of activity, just conversation and sharing among these folks. We also developed a website that's more of a public interface, but also useful for folks who are trying to start a prescribed burn association. So I recommend checking that out. It lists all the different groups that have formed around California and kind of helps you, tie in and connect with those groups if you're interested. Now, another piece that I wanted to bring up that isn't directly related to these prescribed burn associations, but is, I think, a critical element or could contribute in some really meaningful ways, is this new California State Certified Burn Boss program that was mandated by Senate Bill 1260 back in 2018 and has been in an ongoing curriculum development and approval process since then. Just finally got fully approved and finalized this spring. And as I speak, I am hosting the inaugural course of this class here in my office in Eureka. So this week I have 19 people from across the state, all really experienced prescribed fire practitioners, a lot of old friends here. It's a class that's really covering burn planning, smoke management, laws and regulations, a bunch of different elements like that. And these folks will be certified as burn bosses and able to bring that certification home with them to build capacity and do more good work on their home landscapes. So what's the benefit of the certification? I think that's a important question, and we're still kind of uncovering that, because of course no one's certified yet. So you know, we're learning as we go. But according to the legislation that mandated the program, these state certified burn bosses will have the opportunity to share liability with CAL FIRE on specific projects through a cooperative agreement process. So it kind of remains to be seen what that process looks like. It doesn't change the liability standard, but we are working on that. So and I'll talk about that during the policy section. I also think one of the big benefits of the state certification will be recognition by NRCS. So currently in California, NRCS will only work with federally qualified burn bosses. So, you know, you have to have that RxB2 qualification in order to write burn plans or to lead burns that are funded by NRCS. That's a huge bottleneck for those of us who are trying to implement on the ground, because there aren't very many private burn bosses who are willing to do this work for hire or who are insured to do this work for hire. So now with the state certification, NRCS, they've been doing some revisions to their state policy, thankfully, and they are going to include the state certification in that revised policy. So that's a big deal. I think it will really open up a lot more opportunity for us locally. And then there's some things in the works to deal with the insurance issue for prescribed fire burn bosses. Nothing's resolved yet, but there's potential that there could be some kind of state-backed claims fund for prescribed fire. And if that were to happen, this certification would probably tier really nicely into that and be recognized by that. So I see that as another benefit if and when we're able to create those insurance solutions. So I just wanted to finish again by sharing this and letting you ponder it for another 30 seconds and just really think about how much has changed in the last 10 years. I mean, when we formed the the Prescribed Fire Council in 2009, it was, you know, no one was used to sitting in a room and talking about prescribed fire with other people. People were very siloed. It was just not a conversation that was happening. And now it's like all we can talk about, right? So I just think it's important to reflect on that decade of amazing stuff that's happened and to thank all of you for being leaders in that. So with that, I will stop my share and feel free to email me if you want any more information or want to become more involved in any of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lenya. You know, it was really exciting to have a PBA style burn in a happy camp, you know, right up against the edge of the Slater fire, where a private landowner who was part of the volunteer fire department got their own permit from the Forest Service and then connected with local resources, including the tribe and MCWIC and others, to provide a workforce and implemented a seamless burn, you know, even when some of the permitting agencies were a little squeamish this last March. And, you know, there's so much power in that PBA model, especially to empower private landowners to burn. So thank you for all your work on that. And Margot, are you ready to share your screen and get this going?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any questions right now, so I think we can just wait and have a discussion at the end of the section unless we see some questions pop up.
Ayukui, Necknow Margot Robbins, Keechnack, Executive Director for the Cultural Fire Management Council. The Cultural Fire Management Council, also known as CFMC, is a nonprofit organization located in far northern California on the lower Klamath River. We are composed primarily of community members. Most of us are Yurok tribal members, but it's not restricted to tribal members. Our community has as a #1 priority bringing back fire as the most important thing in our community. This was decided about 8 years ago. And the reasons for that is that our culture is fire dependent. We are basket weavers, and the frames of our baskets is made with hazel, which requires fire in order to reproduce. The other reason it rose to the front of the priority list or the top is that we were worried that if there was a wildfire in our area, that our elders would not be able to escape. These are some pictures of our food sources and basketry materials and medicine plants that not just our ancestors, oh no, my slides are changing by themselves again. Not just our ancestors, but we continue to use. So we continue to gather food from the land and from the water sources. We continue to use medicine plants for the land to heal ourselves. We continue to carry our babies in baskets and lift up prayer with baskets, which again require fire in order to produce some of the materials that we use. Not only hazel, but the white color that you see on these baskets requires fire to be useful for, to make the bear grass useful for weaving, to cover the roots, to make the design. Some of our food sources, such as acorns, also are dependent on fire. If we don't burn underneath the tan oak trees, the acorns will become infested with weevils and not good to eat. The canopies will close up, and the berries that grow in the understory of those tan oak trees will not receive sun, and so they will stop reproducing. The land becomes so overgrown with brush that large animals such as deer and elk will no longer come into the areas or raise their babies. On the left of this picture, you'll see a young man pulling a salmon out of the net, and you might wonder what that has to do with fire. And it is an important thing to note that fire and water is intimately connected. Fire increases the quality and quantity of water. When we have hillsides that are covered in brush, soaking up all the water, those places where ferns grow and that are normally creeks will start to dry up. And when those water sources feed the river are drying up, the amount of water in the river is greatly reduced, and the water gets too warm to support life, such as salmon. And so putting fire onto the hillsides on a landscape level is critically important. This is a picture of one of our first burns that we did on the reservation. In the forefront, you can see those plants with the limbs coming out on them. And this is hazel. This is what we use for baskets, except we can't use them when they grow like this. When we apply fire to the hillside in the hazel patches, they'll send up straight sticks, single stems, and that's what we use for baskets. Without fire, a huge piece of our culture is missing. We make baskets to carry our babies, to lift up prayer, to eat, to catch animals, to carry things. It's a critical piece of who we are as Yurok people. We also use fires as home protection. Here is an elder in our community who is putting the last touches to a relatively small burn behind his home. You can see that we burned right down within maybe 5 feet of his house and his shed. In the background, you can see a firefighter that is has his helmet and all of his his PPE on and standing there with the hose as a safety precaution. We have young men and women who have cut a line around this fire in the back and then start the fire at the top of the slope and slowly bring it down the hill. You can see how pleased this fella is that he is getting his home safeguarded against fire to some degree. The Cultural Fire Management Council is part of the Indigenous Peoples Burn Network, the 3 tribes that piloted the program is Hupa, Yurok, Karuk. And we came together not as formal tribal members, but as cultural practitioners within the community interested in bringing back true traditional burning. So what we are doing now is we call it cultural burning. And because we're doing it for cultural purposes, we're not doing it the way that our ancestors did. They didn't have Nomex to wear. They didn't have fire engines or do hose lays. They went out and burned at the right place at the right time. And we want to get back to that way of burning, but we can't immediately start doing that because of the huge fuel buildup on the land, that it would be very dangerous to just go out and burn. And so we have developed a plan called the Healthy Country Plan that lays out a way for us to get from where we're at today back to true traditional burning. And one of those strategies is family burns. Traditionally, families burned their own hunting and gathering areas as well as around their homes. And we thought that it was going to take a long, long time before families would be able to do that. But we realized that as we burn the larger areas with Trex burns, it makes it safer for families to burn their own smaller areas. And so we have a cache of tools that families can use to prepare their land to accept fire in a good way, making sure it stays within the boundaries of the planned area. We also have, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, a little slip-on engine, which is a portable source of water that when families are ready to burn around their hunting or gathering or homes, that we bring this portable source of water as an extra safety measure. We also help them put fire lines in around their homes because it's a lot of work. And so it's always nice to have help. In these pictures, you'll see me and my grandkids and my kids and my sister. And we are teaching our young ones how to burn safely and why. So this is just a little briar patch on the front yard at my place. And I had the day before put a little lighter in there to see how the fuels acted. And it just kind of skunked around, didn't get too big or anything. And so I thought this is a good way to teach my grandkids how to burn. They had been kind of traumatized by a wildfire that had threatened their home. And so I wanted to teach them that you don't have to be afraid of fire, that fire, there is such a thing as good fire, and you can take precautions and do it in a way to keep it under control. And so the kids had helped me make some wormwood torches to light the fire with. And so I took them up to the top of this little slope and taught them about, you always start the fire from the top and then you can burn once the top is black, burn on the sides, and then you can go down to the bottom. So that's what we did on this day. You can see all ages of people in these photos, and that's the way that it's supposed to be. Fire should be available for all people of all ages, And that if people would just take the time to learn how to do it responsibly. Another way that we put fire on the land is with the Cultural Burn Training Exchange TREX. And I'm not sure if everybody knows what TREX is, but basically it's a training for firefighters in how to do prescribed burns. And so twice a year, we invite firefighters from across the United States, and sometimes people from other countries come as well. And together we put fire on the ground. We are all learning and burning together. When they come and we walk the units that we intend to burn, we point out which plants are culturally important, which plants we use to make baskets, which plants we use to make medicinal teas, which ones are going to provide a food source for us. And also we will share other parts of our culture, not all of it, but just to give them a glimpse into why it's important to us as Native people to continue putting fire on the land. We use TREX burns as an opportunity also to teach the next generations of fire practitioners how to do burns safely and why they're important. So during cultural burn training exchanges, we'll bring van loads of students out from the local schools. And you can see here, Rick O'Rourke, he is not just a qualified firefighter, he is a cultural fire practitioner, and he's also a cultural consultant for the school district. And so he'll peel off from the group of people that are doing fire and take time to talk with the students about the importance of fire. You'll also see a young mom here on the right holding her baby, and she's learning about fire too. She's from the neighboring tribe and they want to bring back cultural burning. And so she came down to learn about fire as well. So as we are teaching the kids about safe burn practices, we're teaching them about these modern things that we use, such as the fold-a tanks, the importance of having water. Just like when we do the family burns, this is like on a bigger scale. So we have the fold-a tanks. This is a group of high school students that came down, and they're there to spend the whole day and learn as much as they can about it. For a while, we had a class at the high school that the students could take, and when they finished, they would actually get their red card, be qualified firefighters. Teaching them about the hoses and the drip torches, and at other times, at other opportunities, we also teach them about the more traditional ways of burning. So this is what our land looks like without fire. The brush is so thick, nothing can really walk through it except maybe bunny rabbits and wood rats. There's no place here for deer to wander, no place for elk, no place for an animal of any size to get through here. The native plants are being choked out by these invasive species that have gone unchecked. And so this is what we are dealing with in our homelands. For several years, we was just operating on a little shoestring budget in order to put a fire line around this area to burn it. We got community members to just volunteer to put a fire line around it. No interior work. When the fire line was around it, I brought deer meat sandwiches and fed them deer meat sandwiches for lunch. And that's what enabled us to get this burn done. So you can see in this picture, the smoke rising up. There's still some some plants there. Of course, it takes more than one entry into a burn area in order to really make a difference, a huge difference in what's growing there. It's not something that you can go in and burn one time and pat yourselves on the back and say, good job, we're done with that, let's go do something else. There are certain cycles of return entries that it's important to go back every 3, 5, 8 years and burn again, depending on what it is that you're burning for. In this particular place, we just had a 3rd entry, and boy, is it looking beautiful. I love this picture. Look at that young mom looking up there. This area that we're burning is a traditional hazel gathering place, and she is just soaking it up, dreaming of when they'll be able to do cultural burns on their land. She's a basket weaver, and so she needs hazel to weave. And after the smoke is gone, we're left with an area that the trees are, for the most part, unharmed, and the brush is gone. This is a fire ecology field trip that we took students on after the cultural burn, and one of the cultural consultants is showing them the acorns and how the ones in the burned areas are so much better than the ones that went unburned. So our intergenerational transfer of knowledge component of our program is very key to accomplishing the goals that we have set out to accomplish, because we're not going to complete this goal of bringing fire back the way it needs to be in our lifetime. We'll get a good start on it, and then the generations after us will need to carry it on. So we're making sure that they have the knowledge and the expertise to do that. The next generation of fire practitioners are looking to us to show them the way. It's our responsibility as human beings to use fire as a tool to bring the land back into balance, both physically and spiritually. Fire is meant to be part of the ecosystem, and we as humans are meant to be a part of the ecosystem as well. We can't sit back and do nothing and expect lightning fires to do all of the work to take care of the land. There's always going to be lightning fires. And if we don't do our part to reduce the brush, to balance the ecosystems, then those lightning fires and other kinds of fires will continue to get bigger and bigger and more devastating. But if we will take responsibility to learn how to use fire in a good way, it will make a difference. I'm a strong believer that fire is a tool that all people should have access to. It's not just a native thing. All people should have access to the use of fire to take care of their homes and to make the land healthy. Yeah, the individual landowners, NGOs, for-profits, tribes, as well as the government agencies. If we all work together, it will make a difference. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for that presentation, Margot. You know, the more I work in fire up and down the West Coast, the more I run into people who've attended the Yurok treks, and it changed their life. You know, and it really, the way you teach fire there is a rare and precious thing. Just this last year, the one day I got to put fire on the ground with you guys and those beautiful oak groves down there, and to just know that you're putting fire on the ground at that best day of the year for that stand, and to see fire do that powerful work, it was really transformative for me. I missed my dad's last birthday party 3 days before he passed, just because, you know, he understood, but that's because that's where I needed to be, was helping you guys, you know, bring fire back in a good way. So thank you so much for speaking with a clear voice about the changes that need to occur. Yeah, really appreciated. I'm going to try and share my screen. We're going to switch gears to start talking about, you know, basically, you know, this silver lining to all the hard fires we've had has been, I think I need to get rid of this thing over here. And to hide that thing there, whoops, forgive me. Are folks still seeing this toolbar at the top of my screen that's blocking some of the view, or can you read the title?
No, it looks good, Will. It looks good.
Okay, great. You know, with all the impacts from fire we've had in the past few years, there is definitely within the state of California a desire to figure out how to change how we manage fire on the landscape, for the better of communities, for tribal folks, and even people in the cities that have been impacted from the smoke. My kids go to school in Alameda nowadays, and their school was shut down for many days last year because of the smoke impacts. And so now people are taking notice. And so shout out to Bill Tripp and the Karuk Tribe, who found funding to put together a team, a diverse team of people from around the state of California, to put together this Good Fire paper, addressing current barriers to the expansion of cultural burning and prescribed fire in California, and recommended solutions. You know, it was a very timely report, strategically timed to be able to inform state legislative bills that were going into the Assembly and the Senate in this latest session. And so a lot of Friedman's Assembly Bill 642 was drawn from the recommendations from this report, as well as Dodd's Senate Bill 332 regarding gross negligence, protecting burners from recovery of cost from suppression. So I apologize today. This presentation is drawn directly from the document and hasn't been reformatted, so some of the words are a little hard to see, but I thought it would be really valuable just to take a quick tour through this document, because the reality is we all need to carry water to make these issues move. And just looking at the attendee list, you know, there's a lot of people who have so much skin in the game and are coming at these issues from different angles. You know, whether it be the environmental compliance aspects, or wildlife management, or cultural revitalization. You know, we all play a role in implementing these changes. And so this is kind of a playbook for folks who want to change fire policy in California and fire management in California. And just, you know, so the overview here, you know, it touches on issues specific to tribes, on air district permitting, CAL FIRE permitting, liability, insurance, environmental review, as well as agency culture and resources. And I just want to give a shout out to Sarah Clark, who was the primary author. She's a lawyer at Shute, Mahaley and Weinberger, and a real advocate for tribes and other people that are implementing prescribed fire around the state of California. You know, thank you, Lanya, for finding her and bringing her to us. I also want to say, in addition to Andrew Miller on her staff, Don Hankins from CSU Chico, who's also a Miwok traditional cultural practitioner, contributed greatly to this report, as well as Margot Lania, Kathy McCovey, Bill, Nick Goulet, Craig Thomas, many other folks across the North State. Craig Tucker did a great job of facilitating the effort. And we had a lot of good review that made this document much better than it was, as a draft. The first section deals with issues that are specific to tribes, and I loved in the document Don's quote that's in the upper right there. To paraphrase, to recognize that fire is the law of the land is to recognize that it is part of the laws of nature. Indigenous fire knowledge encompasses a complex understanding of the environment and reading of the landscape's needs and indicators for when, where, and what type of fire should be used to achieve desired outcomes for the land. So there are a lot of things that are kind of forgotten about with the state level, because the state doesn't really understand how to deal with separate sovereign nations and federally recognized tribes. And so that's not incorporated into public resource code and many of the state laws. And so there are no special protections for cultural fire practitioners. And similarly, a lot of the amazing work that Lenya has done getting this California Prescribed Fire Burn Boss class going, which is actually going on right now. And there are folks from the Yurok Fire taking that class. There's still some issues about how that applies to cultural fire practitioners who may not be within the legal, fire qualification systems. And there is, a lot of uncertainty about tribes that are, trying to participate in state programs and potentially compromising their sovereign immunity by, working with state agencies who then have some kind of authority over them. So Bill has been a great steward for us. Bill Tripp has been a great steward for us to, try and understand that and to hold out for the type of procedural changes that will protect tribal immunity. So you can see, some of the recommended changes in this section are, for the state of California to really, dig into how they can work with tribes and protect their sovereign immunity and still be able to manage smoke and burn permits and everything else that comes out of that. One of the big things is how we relax liability standards for cultural burners in the state of California. Currently, they don't have any special protections. Some other issues with tribes, the agencies are ill-equipped to work with tribes to implement cultural burns. There's not a lot of understanding within the agencies about the specific needs of tribes. It's not always about the burn plan and a burn prescription. It's about delivering fire in the right time in the right place, like Don's quote spoke to. And so it's about resource management and putting fire on the ground in a specific way, which may mean not putting in a fire line down to mineral soil and instead doing a wet line in some places. And so one of the recommendations was that Natural Resources Agency, CAL FIRE, state parks, the Forest Service, other state agencies have positions, people within their organizations that make it their work to understand the needs of tribes in their jurisdiction and to be able to address those needs and expedite the amount of cultural burning that's occurring. Providing funding for tribes to also be able to navigate all these state and federal agency requirements would be a huge step in the right direction. Another barrier is, cultural fire practitioners lack sufficient recognition and support. Part of this paper was even just trying to define, what is a cultural fire practitioner, and how do we, because the state is going to want to know the answer to that question if we're going to start dealing with modifying public resource code. So a couple answers here are, number one, providing funding for tribes to support their cultural fire practitioners, to increase training and create cultural fire programs that allow some sort of tribal certification to occur. And I think we could even model, or, with tribal control, take that CARX model and give tribes resources to be able to develop a cultural fire practitioner program that provides people with protections, tribal members with protections who engage in that. Air district permitting is another huge issue that burners deal with. Some of the biggest issues we face are that, wildfire smoke is kind of scrubbed from the books through the exceptional events rule. And even cultural burning today, where there's some laws that say it should be considered a natural smoke source similar to wildfires, still gets managed and treated separately. And that's especially true for prescribed burns across the state. So a lot of times we can't get prescribed burn permits, for prescribed and cultural burns. Some of the things that we can do are, number one, work with our air districts and build that trust. We've seen that be one of the hugest benefits is they understand our programs and trust us to do the right thing on the ground. But there are changes that we can do, to basically, pre-identify areas where the best burning days are going to occur, and then figure out ahead of time how we can troubleshoot those limiting factors, whether it's distributing air filters preemptively to address those point concerns from the smoke, or other issues or concerns that our air districts have in those times of year, so that we're maximizing for days that we can get. I think one of the big things is getting reducing the use of the exceptional events rules for wildfires and closing that loophole, because what it's doing is it's pushing federal and state agencies to choose wildfires as the delivery method for fire back to our ecosystems. And like Chris Dunn talked about earlier, it's often at the hottest, driest times of year when the impacts are the greatest. And so we need to shift the balance and start to provide more of those exceptions to, cultural burners and prescribed burners who have a much more limited impact, have the ability to turn off their smoke and are doing it for the right reasons. One barrier that was identified was that air districts lack sufficient resources to effectively process permit applications, and sometimes approval is delayed or not given. And so there's a lot of ways that we can fix that, through revisions to Title 17 that help the districts create clear benchmarks for impacts of concern. And also set mandates for how quickly they need to process these applications. And I think one of the things that is a success, we call it a barrier here, that permits are expensive. Luckily, in our neck of the woods, Lania and others advocated for funding for smoke permits to be covered by the state, so that folks like us who are burning out here don't have to cover those costs. However, that's not a permanent thing. And so one of the recommendations here was that state legislature should either eliminate or reduce application fees for public purpose burning, or should direct additional funding to reduce the cost of such fees like they're doing right now. CAL FIRE permitting is another significant issue that we've dealt with time after time. and the real barrier here is that CAL FIRE will either refuse to issue permits or overly condition the permits to the point that we can't have the resources to implement the burn. Some examples are, our burn plan might say we need 2 Type 6 engines and 10 fire practitioners to implement a burn. And CAL FIRE, when they give us a LE7 and LE8 permit, might say we need 2 Type 3 engines, a Type 6 engine, a water tender, and a dozer on standby. And this has really happened. And it basically, number one, raises the cost of the burning extensively. And number two, sometimes we just can't even get those resources. And so we have to cancel burns. And so Humboldt unit has been very good working with us on reducing those requirements. And we're still working with the Siskiyou folks. Some of the other recommended changes to see this change happen with CAL FIRE permitting is to deliver permits online, and this is actually a change that CAL FIRE is trying to implement right now. They're going to be rolling out a system for online permit burn permit acceptance here shortly. Some of the one of the interesting things that's happening right now is that fire season is getting earlier. And so while state law, says you don't need CAL FIRE permits outside of fire season, CAL FIRE is starting to pressure air quality districts because we do need smoke permits throughout the year for us to require those smoke permits. And CAL FIRE does have the right in Public Resource Code, apparently, to tell the air quality districts they can't issue SMAD. In Happy Camp with Denver Lanto, CAL FIRE stepped in and told air quality they shouldn't give us a variance to implement that burn, but air quality gave us the variance anyways, which caused CAL FIRE to come back and have a meeting with air quality and to ensure that they closed that loophole. Luckily, the regional unit chief, Mike Bradley from Reading, stepped in and is pushing the district to be more supportive of our local burning. Now, liability is another huge issue that burners face, and really kind of is, I would say at this point, the number one issue limiting burning in California. An example of that is after the wildfires of 2018, the Camp Fire and the Carr Fire, pretty much every person, every organization such as ours and other private organizations like Firestorm all had their loggers broadform policies that covered prescribed burning dropped. So it was, basically right at the time that we hired Eric Dara as a burn boss to increase our burning, and people around the state were trying to support more, getting more prescribed fire on the ground. A lot of organizations lost their liability coverage and have been scrambling to recover it. Luckily, MCWIC is on a lead right now to a new policy. So hopefully that comes through. But this paper really breaks down some of the recommended changes. And one of them is adopting a gross negligence standard for intentional burns. And this is something that if I get through this quickly enough, Lania can talk about a little bit more detail, because that is the thrust of the Dodd bill, the SB 332, is to create a gross negligence standard. Insurance is a huge one that I just started to talk about that ties in directly with liability. And like it says, insurance is either unavailable, expensive, or inadequate. And so really the thrust of what this recommendations are is that, the state researches and develops a state-backed insurance pool. Basically, it's too risky for the private insurance industry to offer policies. And so similar to the insurance, the state, the publicly funded insurance for medical, for police and for firefighters. They need to understand that cultural and prescribed burning is a public service and deserves that same state-backed insurance pool coverage. And they could also create a state-backed claims pool for extraordinary claims that helps to, pay off people that are impacted by, prescribed burns that escape, which are very few, but, the fear of, that less than 1% getting away really precludes a lot of burning. One of the biggest issues we come up time and time again is that, prescribed burning, even though it was, it was part of the landscape that we found here, now requires environmental review under CEQA and NEPA on federal lands. Even though they don't require CEQA or NEPA for, fire exclusion, which they spend billions of dollars on. And so that's one of the things that, is really hurting us is that, fire needs to be frequent in order to have the intended ecological and cultural effects. And yet every time you go to do a burn, you have to make sure your environmental compliance is up to date, and your areas have environmental compliance done in order to implement the treatments. So you can see there's a ton of changes here. I'm getting a little short on time, but exemptions for cultural burning and prescribed fire, that are limited in scope and scale and have limited impacts or are basically restoring natural conditions, could go a long ways to helping that out. And I think, one of Bill's points here about classifying cultural burning as part of the landscape's baseline condition, such that cultural burns don't amount to a project under CEQA requiring environmental review would be a great step in the right direction. And finally, what we came to is that it's not just about changing the laws, it's about changing the culture within agencies that have been kind of, pushed to embrace fire suppression as the primary way we manage fire on this landscape. The reality is that, longstanding agency culture continues to impede the use of prescribed fire in so many ways that, I don't have time to tell all, even just the recent examples of where, agencies, are pushing back on non-agency practitioners of cultural and prescribed fire in many ways. So one of the changes that's recommended is that, we create fire training centers like they have back east, that are tribally led, that are teaching cultural fire to fire practitioners, and folks like Bill and Margot are doing that with the Klamath Treks and the Yurok Treks. And those people are coming here and learning about that and bringing that back to their landscapes. And it's hugely valuable, but I think that we need to really double down on and get resources behind that effort. I think one of Friedman's bills, AB 642, does request that we build a prescribed fire training center in California. And currently, I think the CAL FIRE and the Forest Service are pushing for that training center to be at McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento. And so I think it's going to take a concerted push to place that training center someplace where, people are learning from tribal people how to restore fire on this landscape. Resources are always an issue. And so, I think hopefully funding continues to increase for the type of work that we're doing through WKRP, and really figuring out a way to streamline the environmental compliance, so that we can get that work done in a timely manner. And then just a note, we don't address all the barriers to increasing the use of intentional fire, and there's some other issues that I think could deserve more research as we go forward. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and invite you, Lenya, if you have any comments about updates for folks about AB 642, Friedman's bill, or Dodd's gross negligence. That'd be great.
Cool, thanks, Will. Well, how much time do we have? Because are we over time a little bit? Or
we are slightly over time. The panel discussion was supposed to start at 1:25. It's currently 1:34. We're going to 1:40. So yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we have a couple
minutes. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Great. Well, yeah, I did put together a couple slides on those bills, so I can share those if we want, and I can just run through them really quickly. I think you did a nice job of talking a little bit about the things that they'll do, but I think there is an important update on Senate Bill 332. So this is the bill that has been put forward by Senator Dodd and addresses liability for prescribed fire. And it was originally proposing to change the civil liability standard for damages. So, if it's basically to address damages from prescribed fire. So if you had an escape and it caused damages to another person's property, this would have changed the standard from a simple negligence to a gross negligence standard. There were some last minute changes before the bill was heard before the Judiciary Committee, and it was amended to, instead of dealing with civil liability, to relieve burners from cost recovery for fire suppression. So it's a different proposal, but it's still an important facet of liability. I mean, as a prescribed burner, the two things I worry about are damages from an escape burn or cost recovery from fire suppression, getting a bill from CAL FIRE. So this now addresses that. And it passed through the Judiciary Committee with full support by the 10 senators who serve on that committee. And now it's going to go to the Appropriations Committee. So I'll keep people posted. Let me know if you want to be on my little email update list about that bill, because I'm staying pretty tight in with that one. And then I didn't change that. So that should say 642, Friedman, which is the other one that Will was talking about. And that one so you brought up a lot of the things that it addresses, but I pulled out some highlights. One of them is that it's proposing that CAL FIRE appoint a cultural burning liaison to advise the agency and engage with cultural practitioners and do a bunch of other things. So that's one piece of 642. It also has some language in there about, so I pulled a direct quote, which you can see here, that would amend the public resource code to say, when engaging with Native American tribes, tribal organizations, and cultural practitioners, the department shall respect tribal sovereignty, customs, and culture. And it also talks about the need to incorporate and support tribal programs for workforce development, as you can see in that other quote. A couple more things. So the Prescribed Fire Training Center, like Will mentioned, is a big one, and it does specifically say that it should ensure that tribal fire managers are engaged in the development and the leadership of the training center. There's also some stuff in there about the state fire marshal developing a streamlined process for tribal practitioners for the state certification. So figuring out a way to recognize their experience with cultural burning and certify them as burn bosses without having to necessarily adhere to the state system. So that's really important for that sovereignty piece. And then one other thing that I think will resonate with any prescribed burn practitioner is the discussion about this very last quote here, the contingency resources, being able to consider non-department, so non-CAL FIRE contingency resources when determining required precautions in permits. That's a huge one, because often we'll have local resources available, but CAL FIRE will deny the permit if CAL FIRE resources aren't available. So those are the highlights.
Thank you so much for that, Lenya. Yeah, that's been one we've been pushing for a long time, is for the Forest Service and CAL FIRE to consider non-agency contingency resources, because a lot of times if there's a wildfire down south, we get our permits pulled and are unable to burn. I did hear that we have until a little bit more time until the next panel starts. I know we want to give folks a short break, but we could probably go to 1:40. I saw in the questions, thank you, Randy Paris, for posting this. It says, is there any discussion of completely lifting any permits for prescribed fire? moving completely to a tracking function to warn people of the change in air quality. It seems like this air quality piece is such a systemic problem. So I think she means lifting any air quality permits for prescribed fire. I totally agree. You know, there's the level of smoke that we're putting up in the wildfire scenario is just orders of magnitude less than wildfire smoke. You know, one of the things we suggested in that Good Fire paper was air quality managers being willing to, you know, accept other forms of information like blue sky modeling, which more folks are being able to do, that can show exactly where the smoke is going to go. And so when they're kind of, you know, using kind of outdated models that say if there's any wind from the east, you have to stop burning, even though, you know, the smoke could be going up the first draw that the burn is at and not getting to the elementary school down the road. So did Margot or Lenya, did you have any other comments about that Randy's question, or anything else to add to just removing air quality permits altogether?
I don't really have anything to add other than to reiterate that cultural burns should be exempt from air quality regulations, that we are part of the ecosystem, and so is fire. It's a natural process.
Amen. I see Bill has a comment in the chat here. It says the Forest Service did say they would honor what the state passes when it comes to the SRA. We will have to fully work with the federal system, fully address issues when there's any federal responsibility areas involved. So that's really exciting, because, you know, the thrust to the gross negligence for the state, we were concerned it wasn't going to affect us as much because the Forest Service assumes the CAL FIRE responsibility for responding to fires. So that's exciting news, Bill. You know, one of the other things that came out from our WKRP letter to the regional forester was that we were able to confirm that federally qualified tribal burn bosses have the ability to be the burn boss of record on public lands burns. So that's a huge opportunity. You know, one of the things we identified in that report is because wildfire season is going longer, you know, the resources within the agencies are, you know, suppression first and prescribed fire second. And so those resources are really taxed out when, you know, when we roll from wildfire season into prescribed fire season. So having these tribal burn bosses, both of the Yurok, Karuk, and Hupa tribes, able to do that type of burning adds another level of resource to get those needed burns done, especially in pilot projects like the Soames project. I see all the questions I see here. Unless there's any other final comments from you wonderful presenters, we can